Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to try and unpack a really complex decade in India, from 2014 to 2024. It's a period that's been marked by some incredible economic growth on one side, but also some really deep concerns about the health of its democracy on the other.
So, we're kicking things off with this really stark warning from international observers because it cuts right to the heart of the whole issue. The big tension we're going to explore is this debate over the very nature of India's democracy and, frankly, its place in the world after 10 years of this kind of transformation.
Okay, to really get what's going on here, we have to talk about this term you might see a lot, electoral autocracy. Research groups like the VDEM Institute are now using it to classify India's political system, and that's a pretty heavy claim. It suggests that, yeah, elections are still happening, but the foundational pillars that support a democracy, they're under some serious strain. So let's break down what that really means for the country.
All right, so here's our game plan for today. We're going to start by looking at two completely opposite stories about this decade, one of democratic decline and another of incredible economic growth. Then we'll dig into the ideological forces that are driving all this change, see how key institutions have been affected, and finally, we're going to ask, what does this all mean for India's path forward?
Okay, so first up, let's look at the critical side of things. Some sources, like the Indian National Congress Party, have actually labeled this period an Anyay Kal, which translates to an era of injustice. And this narrative really focuses on the economic and social struggles people have been facing.
And this right here, this is where it hits home for a lot of people. Just look at these numbers. The price for an LPG cooking gas cylinder jumped 120%. Milk went up 71%. Critics point to stats just like these as proof that, hey, while the big economic numbers might look good, the actual cost of living has put a massive strain on the finances of ordinary families.
And then there's this number, a 45-year high in unemployment. That is a huge deal. There was this promise to create 20 million jobs a year, but some reports show total unemployment actually quadrupled between 2012 and 2022. It's left a whole generation of educated young people really struggling to find work.
And it's not just about jobs. Take a look at this. The whole high-profile Make in India campaign was supposed to be this big push to boost domestic manufacturing, right? But as this chart shows, manufacturing's actual slice of the economic pie has shrunk. Some sources say it's fallen to a low we haven't seen since the 1960s.
So what happened? Well, according to this analysis, for these small and medium-sized businesses, the ones that actually employ the vast majority of Indians, it's been what they call a lost decade. Critics argue that big policy moves, like the sudden demonetization back in 2016 and the rollout of a really complex goods and services tax, hit these smaller guys hard, even while the big corporations were doing just fine.
Okay, but hold on. That is just one side of a very complicated coin. Let's flip it over and look at the counter-narrative you'll find in a lot of economic reports, a story of powerful growth, modernization, and some pretty significant social development.
And you really can't argue with these top-line numbers. They're massive. In just this one decade, India's economy almost doubled in size, jumping from $2 trillion to $3.7 trillion. That's the kind of explosive growth that made it the world's fifth largest economy. And it's not just about the size of the economy. Look at this figure, 270 million. That's the number of people who were lifted out of poverty during this period, according to these reports. It represents a huge achievement in human development. And it stands in pretty stark contrast to that story of widespread economic pain, doesn't it? A huge part of this story is also the digital revolution that happened. This wasn't just small changes. This was a complete transformation of the country's welfare system. You have hundreds of millions of new bank accounts, a new digital ID system that allowed for direct payments to people. It totally changed how the government delivers services and subsidies.
So that's the big question, right? How can both of these stories be true at the same time? An economy that's both soaring and struggling. Well, many academic sources say the key to understanding this contradiction lies in a massive ideological shift that has completely reshaped Indian politics and society.
And at the very heart of that shift is this ideology, Hindutva. As these academic analyses describe it, it's been used as a cornerstone of the ruling party's political strategy. The goal is to consolidate a Hindu vote bank by really emphasizing a collective cultural identity. So, how does that ideology turn into political power? Well, it's a multi-pronged strategy. It mixes these grand stories of a glorified Hindu past with a massive grassroots network of allied organizations, and then it's all supercharged by a really sophisticated use of social media and digital platforms to get the message out. Now, when you have a political shift this big, it's bound to have an impact on a country's institutions.
the guardrails of a democracy. And according to many observers, everything from investigative agencies to the courts and the press have been feeling the pressure.
Okay, take a look at this data because it's pretty jaw-dropping. You see this huge five-fold jump in cases from federal agencies like the Enforcement Directorate. But here's the kicker that critics point to. A staggering 95% of those investigations have targeted political opponents of the ruling party. The argument is that this turns these agencies from neutral bodies into political weapons.
And it's not just the investigative agencies. Concerns have also been pointed at the judiciary. Legal scholars like Nandini Sundar have noted what they see as a pattern, a reluctance from the country's highest court to take on major constitutional cases that could challenge the executive branch, and that raises some tough questions about judicial independence.
And finally, there's the press. A free press is often called the fourth pillar of democracy, and international watchdogs have been raising some serious red flags here. They point to harassment of critical journalists and the use of laws around things like sedition to quiet dissent, which they say eats away at a key part of any healthy democracy.
All right, so we've seen these two totally different stories, growth and decline. We've looked at the ideological engine and the pressure on institutions. So, where does that leave us? What's the real fundamental challenge facing India today?
And this really gets to the heart of the matter. According to these analyses, this isn't just about who wins the next election. It's about something much deeper. It's about the very character of the Indian state, as public institutions are, as they claim, being reshaped from neutral players into tools for an ideology. And the solution, these sources argue, has to be more than just political. It requires a fundamental institutional revival.
So we're going to leave you with this question. After a decade of both incredible growth and deep democratic anxiety, the path forward for the world's largest democracy is one of the most important stories of our time. And the ultimate question really is, can these two Indias, the economic powerhouse and the challenged democracy, continue to exist side by side?